The Madman! After a 2-week wait, the card reveals are finally happening. So here I am to review the first batch of 8 that have been revealed. Our first card, Plague Scientist. The general idea is you could put it in a deck with Jade Swarmer, perhaps. There have been some ideas thrown around where you put it on crazy cards like Sergeant Sally or Tentacle of N'Zoth or Wild Pyromancer, but that seems overly complex. If you did want to just target down and kill one guy, you could just run Vilespine Slayer, which doesn't require you to have a minion on the board. Jump through a few hoops. Great arena card. We'll see whether or not the mid-range applications of this card will see play though. Yeah, it's pretty cool in Knife Juggler also. But you can see how it's tough to combine with a card like Knife Juggler, because if you have the Knife Juggler in play, it would be tough for your Knife Juggler not to be killed. So let's assume that you're playing Knife Juggler alongside Plague Scientist. That's 5 mana already and you're throwing 1 random knife. And then you presumably want to summon more stuff, so that's like a 6 or 7 mana combo to throw some knives out there, which might not always kill the minions. It's pretty tough. Shaman gets the Icebreaker. I guess this is Shaman's penance for Spirit Claws. Reminds me a lot of Spirit Claws, which was a 1 mana 1/3 when it first came out. Obviously you want to combine it with cards that freeze. And currently that seems grim because the only realistic ones from Shaman that work right now are Frost Shock, and then there's the neutral cards of Glacial Shard and like Frost Elemental. So while this card looks extremely bad right now, note that we haven't seen about 120 plus of the cards of the set yet, of which Shaman should be getting more freezing combinations. We'll see. That's all we can say about this card so far. Bloodraiser! It's kind of the new Deathspite. It traded off Deathspite's 4 attack for an initial battle cry of dealing 1 damage to all minions. This one seems really promising. Could just be a staple 2 of in a lot of decks, and it's common, which is going to help out Warrior a lot in Arena. Don't let the 2 attack scare you off too much, because I think a very apt comparison is to compare it with Swipe. Bloodraiser basically deals 3 damage to a target of your choice, you just attack it, and then it deals 1 damage to all of their minions, including your own, which is a slight downside, but it's not a downside because it activates your Enrages, it activates your Acolyte of Pain, it activates your Armor Smith. So really optimistically, it's 2 swipes for the same cost as Swipe. It just requires you to take a bit of damage and requires you to also damage your own board a little bit. Could be the card that makes King Mosh great. You have the Bloodraiser already out, you go ahead and swing with it, it breaks, and then you King Mosh and kill everything. Really good with Sleep with the Fishes. Mountainfire Armor, another card revealed from the Warrior side. I find this card really interesting because it does have that kind of Tar Creeper feel of does something on the opponent's turn, which is cool. It makes the game a bit more interactive. The big thing to realize first is the 3 mana 4/3, which gains you 6 armor, is insane, if that's what it did. The tough thing is you unfortunately can't do what you want to do with it, which is you can't play it and then trade with something to gain 6 armor. It has to actually get killed on your opponent's turn. And how are you going to do that? Well, you could taunt it up with a card like Sun Fury or Defender of Argus. It basically just goes face, kind of, because if you're not going face with it, it's a 3 mana 4/3, which isn't that bad, but there have been a lot of 3 mana 4/3s which haven't seen play. It seems to fit into a really narrow niche of being a good card in aggro against specifically aggro, or in a combo variety where you're playing it in a control deck and you're trying to put taunt on it. Even though it has Death Rattle and you can summon up with N'Zoth, N'Zoth decks tend to be control, and that doesn't seem to fit the category unless you somehow give it taunt, but there doesn't seem to be enough room to put taunt givers into a N'Zoth deck. We'll see. It's a really interesting card to be sure, and I think its viability depends strongly on what else is in this set. It just doesn't fill a need in any deck. Blood Queen Lana'thel. It's the Warlock legendary card. It's a card that rewards discarding yet again. And it's got Lifesteal. Is this the card that makes Warlock great because they lack health gain? We've had enough experience with discard Warlock. Doesn't seem to work at the moment, so just adding this card in isn't going to make discard Warlock viable, and obviously you would run this card in discard Warlock if it were viable. So whether or not this card is going to be good is going to depend very strongly on whether or not discard Warlock is good, and that's going to depend on the other cards in the set. So for now, we kind of take a pass at saying whether or not this card is any good. But I will go as far as to say that there's a thought exercise that needs to be done in order to kind of evaluate Blood Queen Lana'thel, which is in a vanilla Warlock card, which was 5 mana and 6 health, how much attack does it need to be in order to be a good card? Obviously the minimum is 3/6, right? And then even then you're kind of comparing it with a card like Fen Creeper. The main problem is that it doesn't have taunt, so the turn you play it, you can die right after because the opponent just hits you a lot. And they're not going to kill Blood Queen Lana'thel if you're close to dying as well, even if they don't kill you immediately. In which case Blood Queen manages to attack once, it steals 3 health, maybe 4. Since it does get buffed while it is on the board, which is kind of nice. But then your 4 health gain, the opponent just kills you after. Where it does shine is in long drawn out games where you're not going to die the turn of or the turn after you play her. It's just a bit too slow, and it has to be run in specifically Discard Warlock. That's the real killer of the card. So we'll see how good the Discard Warlock cards are this time around. For now, though, the only good news about this card is that you don't really care if it gets discarded because it seems to suck. Prince Taldaram, the bigger brother of the other prince. I struggled a lot to think of ways to actually make this useful, and, well, it's a big limitation on Faceless Manipulator, because even though it does cost 2 less than Faceless Manipulator and does transform into a copy, it's a 3/3 copy, which means you can't do something like Leroy Power Overwhelming Prince Taldaram. So what you're forced to use it on is a card with really strong text on it, which isn't a battle cry. It would be something like playing Blood of the Ancient One and then Innervate and then Prince Taldaram, in which case you're getting a 30/30 for 10 mana. The big drawback of that is that there are hard removal cards in the game which can deal with a 30/30 just as easily as a 9/9. The drawback of using this with Malygos is where you're going to have the rest of your mana. You play your Malygos, you Innervate out Prince Taldaram, and you have a 3/3 for 3, which adds 5 spell damage, which on turn 10, hopefully your opponent can kill a 3/3, right? The drawback also of having your deck run 0 3-cost cards is really tough. I looked through all the classes. It seems like the class that's most likely to be able to pull that off is Warlock. Note that, like it's Prince Brother, it's just that if your deck currently has no 3-cost cards, so you could run it with 3-cost cards, especially since this seems to be a combo ender. It doesn't seem to be that big of a restriction, actually. You can run it in 3-cost cards, since it doesn't seem to be a card you're going to want to play early. What do you want to copy in Warlock? Well, maybe there's some cool cards in this set which you will want to copy. Note that you'll copy the Death Rattle, and Death Rattle is a pretty good thing to copy. A lot of these cards currently require knowledge of the other cards in the set in order to decide whether or not they actually have a role. Ticking Abomination is actually one of those cards too. This is a set which has a decent number of Death Rattles in it, and we're gonna see just how much we want to kill our own stuff. 4 mana 5/6 is really good. The drawback is kind of significant, but there are a few ways to negate the drawback. Method number 1, played in a control deck which isn't actually running small minions, so you just play the 4 mana 5/6 as your first minion. That's pretty good. Priest could purify this card, but they have more important things to purify, such as Humongous Razor Leaf.
Humongous what? Humongous what? Humongous what? Humongous what?
So that's about as positive as I can get about the card. In practice, there don't seem to be any decks right now which fit this guy in, but depends on whether or not there are some good Death Rattles. In theory, it's actually even better than a 4 mana 5/6 because the Death Rattle could be positive if you want to kill your own guys. To be determined. Nerubian Unraveler. People have welcomed this card as the new Loatheb. Spells cost 2 more, but permanently while the card's on the board, whereas Loatheb always only did it for 1 turn. So where's Loatheb better? Well, Loatheb guarantees that spells cost 5 more on that turn. Nerubian Unraveler, if your opponent kills it with like minions, then there's actually no drawback. It does last forever, so against the right deck, this is actually pretty crippling. You play it on turn 6, it can really slow your opponent down. Like, say they're playing Freeze Mage or something. But they can always spend 6 mana to Fireball it as well. And then you've kind of evened out the trade. And to be real, you're kind of spending an extra 2 mana to play the Unraveler itself, because a 4 mana 5/5 is about the stat line you need to be a good card in Constructed. 1 extra mana on Loatheb probably turns it to unplayable status. But in a meta where it's all like really heavy spell decks, theoretically this could work. I'm pretty secure on just giving it a 1-star status already. We're not actually rating cards yet, but I'd be hard pressed to find anything that made this card good. Okay, and those are the 8 cards. Can't wait to see what other horrors await us. No, I can't say anything. No, okay. Try to read between the lines here, okay? There are better cards coming in the future, guaranteed.